The morning sun hung low over the Colorado plains, casting long shadows across the scrubland as Marcus Reed guided his horse through the maze of red rock formations that marked the edge of Cheyenne territory. He'd been riding for 3 days, tracking a string of stolen cattle that had led him farther from civilization than he'd intended to go. The tracks were fresh, maybe 6 hours old, but Marcus knew he was getting close to something more dangerous than rustlers. He was getting close to the reservation. Marcus had spent most of his 32 years avoiding Indian country, not out of hatred, but out of practicality. A white man alone in these lands was asking for trouble, and Marcus had enough trouble already. His ranch was failing, his wife had left him for a banker in Denver, and his reputation as a gunfighter had made him more enemies than friends. The last thing he needed was to add hostile Indians to his list of problems. But those cattle represented everything he had left in the world, and he'd be damned if he'd let some thieves take them without a fight. The trail led him through a narrow canyon where the walls rose like cathedral spires on either side, their surfaces carved with ancient symbols that seemed to watch him pass. His horse, a steady gelding named Ranger, began to act nervous, ears flicking back and forth as if hearing sounds that didn't reach human ears. Marcus loosened his rifle in its scabbard and kept his eyes moving, scanning the rocks above for any sign of movement. That's when he heard it. The distant sound of voices, carried on the wind like whispers from another world. Marcus dismounted and climbed carefully up a rocky outcropping, following the sound until he could peer over the ridge into the valley beyond. What he saw made his blood run cold. Below him, nestled in a green valley beside a meandering stream, was a Cheyenne village. It was small, maybe 30 or 40 lodges arranged in a perfect circle around a central fire pit. Children played between the teepees while women worked at their daily tasks, preparing food, mending clothes, tending to the needs of family and community. Old men sat in the shade, sharing stories and wisdom with younger generations. It was peaceful, domestic, completely ordinary, except for the soldiers. 3 companies of cavalry had surrounded the village, their blue uniforms stark against the brown landscape. Marcus could see their commander, a tall man with silver hair and the bearing of a career military officer, conferring with his subordinates while pointing toward the village. The soldiers were checking their weapons, preparing for something that made Marcus's stomach turn. This wasn't a military engagement, this was a massacre waiting to happen. Marcus had seen enough Indian wars to know the signs. The soldiers weren't positioned for a siege or a negotiation. They were positioned for a dawn raid, the kind that left no survivors and no witnesses, the kind that would be reported as a defensive action against hostile savages in the newspapers back east. He pulled out his spyglass and focused on the village, trying to gauge the situation. The Cheyenne seemed unaware of the danger surrounding them. There were no warriors in sight, no weapons visible, no signs of preparation for battle. These were families, not fighters. People who had probably never raised a hand in anger against anyone. Marcus lowered the spyglass and felt something he hadn't experienced in years: moral clarity. He didn't know these people, didn't speak their language, didn't understand their customs, but he understood innocence when he saw it, and he understood murder when it was about to happen. He had 2 choices. He could ride away, pretend he'd never seen anything, and let events unfold as they would. Or he could do something that would probably get him killed, but might save the lives of innocent people. Marcus Reed had never been accused of being a hero. He'd killed men for money, had driven families off their land for wealthy ranchers, had done things that kept him awake at night. But as he looked down at that peaceful village, he realized that sometimes a man got a chance to balance the scales, to do something right for once in his life. He just had to be smart about it. Marcus made his way carefully down the ridge, keeping to the shadows and using every bit of cover available. He'd learned stealth during his years as a scout, and those skills served him now as he worked his way around the perimeter of the army's position. His plan was simple: warn the village and give them time to escape before the soldiers could launch their attack. But as he got closer, he realized the situation was even worse than he'd thought. The soldiers weren't just preparing for a dawn raid. They were preparing for a night attack, probably timed to begin just before sunrise, when the village would be deep in sleep. He could see them distributing ammunition, checking their weapons, preparing torches that would be used to burn the teepees with their occupants inside. There was no time for subtlety. Marcus was going to have to act fast and hope for the best. He worked his way to the edge of the village, where a young Cheyenne woman was drawing water from the stream. She looked up as he approached, her hand moving instinctively to the knife at her belt. Marcus held up his hands, showing that he was unarmed. "Do you speak English?" he asked quietly. The woman nodded, her dark eyes wary but not hostile. "Some. You are not soldier." "No, I'm not. But there are soldiers out there surrounding your village. They're going to attack tonight." The woman's face went pale. "You lie. We have treaty. We stay on reservation, 'cause no trouble." "I'm not lying," Marcus said urgently. "I've seen this before. They're going to kill everyone. Men, women, children. You have to warn your people. Get them out of here." The woman studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to read the truth in his expression. Finally she nodded and turned toward the village, but Marcus caught her arm. "Wait, how many warriors do you have?" "Few. Most are hunting. Only old men and boys here," Marcus cursed under his breath. The village was defenseless, which probably explained why the soldiers had chosen this target. Easy prey, no resistance, and a story that would play well in the newspapers. "Listen to me," he said. "You need to get everyone out of here right now. Take only what you can carry and head for the high country. Don't use the main trails. They'll be watching those." "Why do you help us?" the woman asked. "You are white man. This is not your problem." Marcus thought about that question, about all the reasons he could give, and all the excuses he could make. In the end, he settled on the simple truth. Because it's the right thing to do. The woman, who introduced herself as Laughing Water, led him quickly through the village, translating as Marcus explained the situation to the tribal elders. The response was immediate and organized, as if they'd been preparing for this moment their entire lives. Within minutes, families were packing essential supplies, mothers were gathering children, and the few young men present were preparing to serve as rear guard. But Marcus knew it wouldn't be enough. The soldiers had horses, superior weapons, and the advantage of numbers. Even if the villagers got a head start, they'd be caught in the open country and slaughtered like sheep, unless someone bought them time. "I need to talk to your chief," Marcus said. Laughing, Water led him to an elderly man with silver hair and eyes like chips of obsidian. Chief Grey Wolf listened as Marcus explained the situation, his weathered face showing no emotion. When Marcus finished, the chief studied him for a long moment. "You risk much to help us," Grey Wolf said in careful English. "Why?" "Because I've seen what happens when good people do nothing," Marcus replied. "I've been that person too many times." Grey Wolf nodded slowly. "You have warrior's heart, even if you wear white man's clothes. What do you propose?" Marcus took a deep breath. "I'm going to create a distraction, something to draw their attention away from the village while your people escape. But I'll need some help." "What kind of help?" "Noise. Confusion. Make it look like you're mounting a counterattack from the north while you're actually escaping to the south." The chief considered this, then spoke rapidly in Cheyenne to the other elders. After a brief discussion, he turned back to Marcus. "It is a dangerous plan. You will likely die." "Probably," Marcus agreed. "But your people will live." Grey Wolf studied him for another long moment, then extended his hand. "You are welcome in our lodge, Marcus Reed. Your spirit will be remembered." The next hour was controlled chaos as the village prepared for evacuation. Marcus helped where he could, loading supplies, organizing the evacuation route, and preparing the distraction that would hopefully save dozens of lives. The plan was simple: A few of the younger men would create noise and movement to the north of the village, while Marcus attacked the soldiers' position from the east. The combination should be enough to confuse the military long enough for the families to escape. As the sun set behind the mountains, casting the valley in deep shadow, Marcus found himself alone with his thoughts. He'd made his choice, and he was at peace with it. For the first time in years, he was doing something that felt right, something that might actually matter. Laughing Water approached him as he checked his weapons. "You have family?" she asked. "Had a wife. She left me for a better man." "Children?" Marcus shook his head. "Never had any. Probably for the best." "No," Laughing Water said firmly. "You would have been good father, kind man, brave man. Your children would have been proud." Marcus felt an unexpected warmth in his chest. "Thank you for saying that. I say only truth. Tonight you are father to all our children. You give them life with your courage." As full darkness fell, Marcus took his position on the eastern ridge overlooking the soldiers' camp. He could see them making final preparations, checking weapons and equipment. In a few hours, they would move against the village, expecting to find sleeping families. Instead, they would find Marcus Reed. He thought about his life, about the choices he'd made and the roads he'd traveled. He thought about the men he'd killed, the wrongs he'd committed, the opportunities for goodness he'd let slip away. Tonight, he had a chance to balance the scales, to do something that mattered. The attack began at midnight. Marcus opened fire from the ridge, his rifle shots echoing across the valley like thunder. At the same time, the young Cheyenne warriors created a commotion to the north, whooping and firing into the air, making it sound like a major assault was underway. The soldiers, caught off guard, scrambled to respond to threats from multiple directions. Marcus kept up a steady rate of fire, moving from position to make it seem like there were more attackers than there actually were. He could see the soldiers forming battle lines, their commander shouting orders as he tried to assess the situation. The confusion was working. Instead of attacking the village, they were defending their own position. But Marcus knew it wouldn't last long. Professional soldiers would quickly realize they were facing a much smaller force than they'd initially thought. He had to keep them occupied as long as possible. He made his way down from the ridge, using the darkness and his knowledge of the terrain to get close to the soldiers' position. From there, he could do more damage, create more confusion, buy more time for the fleeing villagers. The next hour was a nightmare of gunfire and chaos. Marcus fought like a man possessed, striking from the shadows and disappearing before the soldiers could respond. He picked off sentries, sabotaged equipment, and kept up a constant harassment that prevented the military from organizing an effective response. But eventually, numbers began to tell. Marcus took a bullet in the shoulder, then another in the leg. His ammunition was running low, and he was leaving a blood trail that would make him easy to track. He found shelter behind a fallen log and tried to assess his situation. It wasn't good. The soldiers had finally organized themselves and were beginning to close in on his position. The young Cheyenne warriors had fallen silent, probably having withdrawn as planned. Marcus was alone, wounded, and surrounded by enemies who wanted him dead. He checked his remaining ammunition. 6 bullets left, enough to make a final stand, but not enough to escape. He thought about Laughing Water and Chief Grey Wolf, about the children who should be safely away by now. If he'd bought them enough time, his death would have meaning. That's when he heard it, the sound of approaching horses, moving fast through the darkness. Marcus raised his rifle, preparing for the final charge, when he realized the sound was coming from the wrong direction. The riders burst into the soldiers' camp like avenging angels, their war cries echoing across the valley. But these weren't the few young men who had helped with the distraction. This was a full war party, maybe 40 or 50 mounted warriors, painted for battle and armed with modern weapons. Marcus watched in amazement as the Cheyenne warriors tore through the soldiers' position like a tornado. The military men, already confused and disorganized by Marcus's harassment, were completely unprepared for a coordinated assault by experienced fighters. Within minutes, The battle was over. The surviving soldiers fled into the darkness, abandoning their equipment and their wounded. The Cheyenne warriors let them go. They had made their point. Marcus lay behind his log, bleeding and exhausted, as the warriors searched the battlefield. He expected to be killed, but instead found himself looking up at a familiar face. Chief Grey Wolf knelt beside him, his expression grave, but not hostile. "You are hurt," the chief said. "I'll live," Marcus replied. "Your people, did they escape? They are safe. But you saved them with your blood, with your courage." Marcus felt relief wash over him. That's all that matters. Other warriors gathered around, their faces painted with symbols Marcus didn't recognize. Grey Wolf spoke to them in Cheyenne, gesturing toward Marcus. Whatever he said caused murmurs of what sounded like approval. "My warriors want to know why you fought for us," Grey Wolf said. "They do not understand why white man would risk death for strangers." Marcus thought about the question, about all the complex reasons that had led him to this moment. "Because someone had to," he said finally. "Because it was right." Grey Wolf translated, and the warriors nodded approvingly. One of them, a young man with fierce eyes and intricate tattoos, stepped forward and spoke rapidly in Cheyenne. "He says you have earned the right to be called brother," Grey Wolf explained. "He says you fought like Cheyenne warrior tonight." Marcus felt tears he hadn't expected building in his eyes. "I'm honored." The warriors carefully lifted Marcus and carried him to their horses. As they rode through the darkness toward the hidden village, Marcus learned how the war party had arrived at exactly the right moment. "We were hunting," Grey Wolf explained. 3 days' ride from village. But spirits sent us dreams, told us to return quickly. We rode hard, arrived just as battle began." "Convenient timing," Marcus said. "No," the chief said seriously. "Not convenient. Destiny. The spirits knew you would need help, knew you would not abandon our people. They sent us to fight beside you." Marcus didn't know what to make of that explanation, but he was grateful nonetheless. Without the warriors' intervention, he would have died alone on that ridge, probably after failing to save the village. They reached the hidden camp just as dawn was breaking over the mountains. The villagers had established a temporary settlement in a hidden valley, protected by steep cliffs and accessible only through a narrow pass. As Marcus was helped from his horse, he was surrounded by faces he'd helped save. Children who smiled at him with innocent gratitude, women who pressed small gifts into his hands, old men who spoke words of blessing in their native tongue. Laughing Water was there too, her face bright with relief and joy. "You came back," she said. "We feared you were dead." "So did I," Marcus admitted. "But your warriors saved me." "No," she said firmly. "You saved us. The warriors came because of your courage, because the spirits saw your sacrifice." Marcus spent the next 2 weeks recovering from his wounds in the hidden village. It was unlike anything he'd ever experienced, a community bound together by shared struggle and mutual support. He learned their customs, their stories, their way of seeing the world. He discovered that courage came in many forms, that wisdom could be found in unexpected places, and that family wasn't always about blood. Chief Grey Wolf spent hours with him, sharing the history of his people and the challenges they faced. Marcus learned about the broken treaties, the stolen land, the systematic attempt to destroy a way of life that had existed for thousands of years. "We are not angels," Grey Wolf admitted. "We have made war, taken scalps, done things we are not proud of, but we are also not devils. We are people, trying to survive in a world that seems determined to destroy us." Marcus understood. He'd seen enough of the frontier to know that good and evil weren't divided along racial lines. There were white men who were saints, and white men who were monsters, just as there were Indians who were noble and Indians who were brutal. The difference was in the choices people made, not the color of their skin. On his last night in the village, the tribe held a ceremony in Marcus's honor. He was given a new name, Stands for Others, and was formally adopted into the tribe as a brother. The The ceremony was conducted entirely in Cheyenne, but Marcus understood the meaning through the emotions he saw in the faces around him. "You are always welcome here," Grey Wolf told him. "This is your home now, your family. When you are ready to leave the white man's world behind, we will be here." Marcus was touched by the offer, but he knew he couldn't stay. The frontier was his world, with all its complexity and contradiction. But he also knew he would never forget these people, this experience, this moment when he'd found his true self. He left the village with a new horse, new clothes, and a new understanding of what it meant to be human. The cattle that had led him into this adventure were forgotten. They seemed insignificant compared to what he'd gained. Marcus returned to his failing ranch, but he was a different man. He began quietly helping other travelers, offering shelter to those who needed it, regardless of their race or circumstances. He became known as someone who could be trusted, someone who would stand up for what was right. Word of his actions at the Cheyenne village spread, though the story changed with each telling. Some said he was a hero who'd saved an entire tribe. Others said he was a traitor who'd turned against his own kind. Marcus didn't care what people said. He knew what he'd done and why he'd done it. Years later, when the Indian Wars were mostly over and the frontier was becoming civilized, Marcus would sometimes receive visitors at his ranch. Cheyenne travelers would stop by, sharing news from the reservations and the scattered communities where his adopted family lived. They would always be welcome at his table, always treated with the respect and dignity they deserved. And sometimes, when the wind was right and the moon was full, Marcus would hear the sound of distant drums, the echo of songs sung in a language he'd never fully learned, but somehow understood. On those nights, he would remember the village by the stream, the moment when he'd chosen to stand for others, and the brothers who had ridden through the darkness to save him. The frontier was a harsh place, full of violence and prejudice and lost opportunities, but it was also a place where a man could find his true character, where courage could bridge any divide, and where the bonds of brotherhood could transcend any difference. Marcus Reed had started that day as a failed rancher, chasing stolen cattle. He'd ended it as something much more valuable, a man who had found his purpose, his family, and his place in the world. And sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, he would whisper a prayer of gratitude to the spirits who had brought him to that hidden valley, who had shown him that heroism wasn't about being perfect. It was about being willing to stand up when it mattered most. Because someone had to, because it was right, because in the end, that's all that really matters. The story of Marcus Reed became legend throughout the Colorado Territory, passed down through generations of settlers and natives alike. Children would hear about the white cowboy who risked everything to save a Cheyenne village, and they would learn that courage comes in many colors, that honor transcends race, and that sometimes the most important battles are fought not for glory, but for the simple human dignity of people who can't fight for themselves. In the end, that was Marcus Reed's greatest victory, not the battle he fought that night, but the example he set for all who came after. He proved that heroism isn't about being perfect, but about being willing to do what's right when it matters most. And that lesson, more than any monument or marker, ensured that his legacy would endure long after the frontier itself had passed into memory.